Speaking about the Kogi supplementary elections, the Kogi West Senatorial District supplementary elections in the 53 polling units of the Ajaokuta Federal Constituency had a rerun which held in 22 polling units.
All right, the Independent National Electoral Commission had declared that the November 16 rerun election in Kogi West Senatorial District between Senator Dinovilai and Smart Adeyemi inconclusive because of the margin of win was less than the total council votes.
Well, having concluded that supplementary election on Saturday, the candidate of the APC, Senator Smart Adeyemi, was declared winner after polling 88,373 votes to defeat the PDP candidate, Dinovilai, who polled 62,133 votes. However, the conduct and process of the election continues to generate controversies. And joining us now for a review of the election and, of course, the role of the courts in elections in Nigeria is Salifu Oguche Usman, a legal practitioner. Thank you so much for joining us. Joins us from our Abuja studios.
Thank you for having me.
Let me begin by asking you, because we do understand that the People's Democratic Party candidate, Senator Dinovilai, is heading to court at the tribunal to challenge these elections. He had made allegations previously in the initial November 16 election asking for it to be cancelled. But I want to ask you the role of the courts in election aftermath. Does it show how democratic the process has become, or is it revealing the flaws in the systems and process of our elections? What's your take?
I think the fact that every election we have in Nigeria have to end up in the court shows that something is fundamentally wrong with our electoral process. Ordinarily, a credible and transparent electoral process should build confidence in the mind of citizens. And at the end of an electoral exercise, the people should willingly accept the outcome of the process and accept either victory or defeats in good faith and go home and support whoever wins in the entire process. But what we have in Nigeria, it's sad that at the end of every electoral exercise or process, it has to end in court. It shows that the people lacks confidence. The people have lost faith in our electoral process. That is why every of our elections eventually ends up in the court. That is not good for our democracy. That is not a sign of positive development for our democratic system. It is not correct. It shouldn't be the position. That's my take on that.
I mean, it is not correct. It shouldn't be the position, but it's the norm now in society. I mean, there's a difference between idealism and reality. It is our reality. I mean, you were surrogate for somebody that had a valid case in court. I mean, former deputy, governor of, Kogi State, for instance, and you saw how his process went.
Yes.
And somebody would have thought that it shouldn't be that way. So what do we start to do when what shouldn't be the case has become reality?
I think all we need to do as a people today in Nigeria all we need to do as a people today, sorry.
Just go ahead, Salifu.
Sorry.
Salifu, go ahead. I can hear you.
What we need to do as a people today, as Nigerians, I think what we need most now is an electoral reform. I think we need to go back to the Ways report so that we can rejig our electoral process. Something is fundamentally wrong with our electoral process. And like you said, reality is different from idealism. The reality on ground today is that our democratic system doesn't give room for credible leadership. And since it does not give room for credible leadership, there is every need for us to rejig same. And the rejigging can only be done through a legislative process, there must be some form of institutional restructuring, readjustment in such a way that our electoral system can be more credible and more transparent than what we have. For want of better language, I think we will need to move towards electronic voting. We'll need to move beyond the stage we are today so that people can have confidence, people can have faith in the electoral process. But with what we have today, the best you can always have is what is happening now. Every election must end up in court. Losers will always feel bad that they've been shortchanged, and winners will always have it all. And this cycle will continue, which is definitely not good for us. And there is every need for us to change that narrative.
Okay, so can you hear me, sir? Okay, so Mr. Senator Dino Melaye has described this election as temporal and evaporative. He also claimed that there was an assassination, allegedly assassination on his life. He talked about being attacked physically, psychologically, and even spiritually. So I would like to get your take on, during this recent run of re-elections in Kogi State as well as in Bayelsa State, Kogi State in your case, what is the security yes. in place put like? Because we have certain people that have come out to say that they were harassed. What is your take on that? People that have been harassed leading up to these elections.
I have heard countless Nigerians refer to that election as war. I think it was more than war. I call it a genocide. I call it a genocide against the innocent people of Kogi State because it was a state-orchestrated war against defenseless citizens. I was involved in that election. A number of persons, most Kogais were involved in that election, and the people were left at the mercy of hoodlums. Talks reigned unchallenged, and they were even supported with armed security men. In most polling units, including where I participated in the election, the police were just there as onlookers. At the initial part of the election, it was as if they were there to maintain law and order. But when the real business of voting started, they gave way, and the Turks took charge of the security of the entire process. They gave orders, they dictated whatever happened. Thumbprinting were done at their discretion. Results were, opposition agents were chased away, and some were harassed. Even some persons lost their lives. I know of a
Okay, so let's talk about voter. Okay, go ahead.
I know of a core member from my community who was an ad hoc staff in Ibaji local government area of the state, and when ballot boxes were to be snatched at his polling unit, and he tried to resist, he was thrown into the Ibaji River. He was buried the weekend before this last one. You saw the incidents in Lokoja where government-owned helicopter was used to tear gas and fire and kill innocent citizens. One lady is still lying critically ill at the Federal Medical Center in Lokoja. One was shot on the premises of the Anglican Church in Lokoja. So many persons lost there. I think we had, at the last counting, we had over 16 persons dead as a result of that election. It wasn't an election.
Mr. Oguche Usman, the police has denied the claims that the helicopter was used to cause mayhem in Kogi State. But we'll come back to talk some more, especially about this rerun on Saturday after this break. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the Morning Show here on Arise News, and we're still reviewing the conduct of elections in Kogi State, especially with the senatorial rerun elections held on Saturday. And to help us take a critical look, especially the legal implications as we record increased cases of election petitions, is Oguche Usman, a legal practitioner who is with us from our Abuja studios. Thank you so much for staying with us. You had talked about those affected by the violence in these elections. While Saturday's elections, according to a lot of observers, was relatively peaceful, was largely peaceful, beg your pardon, was largely peaceful. There were other hitches for the elections. For instance, voter apathy was something recorded by almost all the observers, and including INEC. Is this a consequence of the electoral violence we saw on November 16? Or do you think that the people were registering their protests of their dissatisfaction with the electoral conduct in Kogi State? What is your take?
My sister, I think you have the answers there. One, nobody would ordinarily want to die for the sake of an election. And from what happened on November 16, 2019, it is clear to every Kogite that the APC government in Kogi State is ready and willing to stop at nothing to have its way. And if they are ready and willing to stop at nothing to have their way, and most significantly is the fact that your votes doesn't really count. So what's the point going out to vote? People felt there was no point going out to vote, and people decided to stay in their homes. Even if death is going to find you, let it be that you are found in your house. So there was no point going out to vote. That was why the exercise recorded so much apathy. And even at that, the place was manned by APC thugs, and there wouldn't have been any voter's presence wouldn't have changed anything. So the people was just ordinarily not interested in the rerun, and the APC was left to run their own show. That was what happened in the Saturday rerun election. In Ajaokuta Federal Constituency, for the records, where Aloysius Okino was to have a rerun with the APC candidates. Aloysius Okino was already leading with 1,370 votes. But in the rerun that took place on Saturday, himself was overwhelmed with talks in his own polling unit. He couldn't even cast his vote for himself, and he eventually retired home. So his supporters had no choice but to abandon the entire process. It wasn't an election. Let us not call this what happened in Kogi an election. Calling it an election, it's an insult on the word democracy itself. I think we should call it an exercise for power grabbing or whatever, but it could be anything, but certainly not a democratic process. It wasn't an election.
Okay, Salifu, if you can hear me, exercise for power grabbing, you say. I mean, Yaga has come out to say that the elections should be cancelled. I mean, there were no elections in Kogi. In fact, on the television program Monitor Today, Yaga did confront INEC. Confronted the INEC official Festus Okoye and told him to his face that there were no elections in Kogi. But also the role that people play in all of this. And you talked about the APC talks. Most of the APC talks, there were very strong allegations that these talks, were sort of like assembled by the deputy governor or the incumbent deputy governor of the state, which happens to be, relatives with you, like you said in the subsequent show we had. How can you speak truth to power and tell people like that, allegedly anyway, that we should do what is right, what is ethical, what is moral?
So we have been in this crusade all along. For over 3 years now, we've been in this crusade. We have told the whole world that there is so much armament going on in Kogi State, all preparatory to this recently concluded election. But the federal government was not interested in doing the needful. They were only interested in preserving APC governance in Kogi State. The IG was informed, the presidency was informed, every conceivable institution in this country was aware of the fact that the present government, the sitting government in Kogi was preparing for war and not an election. And the state chose to look the other way around. The state did not just choose to look the other way around, but tactically empowered the state government to do what they did just for them to preserve the government for the party. I think what has happened to the people of Kogi and what has happened to our democracy is the fact that we have taken a step far behind 1999, where we are coming from. We have been taken aback. And all the gains we have made between 1999 and 2015 that eventually brought this present government into power has been lost. It has been ridiculed. The government is aware. We have made this abundantly clear to the whole world. It's just unfortunate that we have a government that has decided, that has deliberately decided to refuse to do anything about the plight of the people. A government that has decided to perpetuate itself in power, not minding what the people feel. And when you have a government that has made up its mind to do that, what do you do as a people? Unfortunately, Nigeria is a sovereign nation. Despite all our cry to international communities, international organizations, and all of that, they are bound by international regulations. They can't directly interfere in our local affairs. The best they could do is to advise and all of that. There is nothing they can do. And since the government of the Federal Republic of Nigeria has given them tacit approval to do what they have done, there is nothing anybody could do about it. You can't even call them to bring them to book through the judicial process, because the institutions of the Nigerian police that ordinarily should be in the forefront of bringing these people to book has their tacit support. So what do you do as a people? We will continue to push for institutional reform. We will continue to push for the reform of our electoral system. I think that is the only option that is left for us as a people.
Okay, Mr. Salifu, you have mentioned that there's necessary steps that have to be taken. You've also mentioned the fact that we have tried to reach out to international organizations. As far as it stands now, up until we hear back from Mr. Senator Dimnu Melaye, if he takes this to the tribunal court, we know that we have another 4 years while this rests, and we are still going to have elections. Now, comparing the November 16 elections to this, Adesuwa had mentioned earlier, talking about the voters' apathy, how we didn't have the numbers of people come out because, one, they were afraid for their lives. Two, they realized that even if they come out to vote, there's a possibility that it's not reflected. You've mentioned national reforms, but you've put this under a bracket. As a legal practitioner, I would like to know, in about 2 or 3 steps, things that we can actually do, gearing up to the next set of elections that we have in Kogi, in Bayelsa, and generally around the nation in the next coming years.
Well, thank you for that very important question. In an ideal democratic situations, there are a number of steps that we can take as citizens of Nigerians to redress or to change this present narrative that we find ourselves. First and foremost, there should be a form of synergy between civil societies, other political stakeholders, including political parties, and all aggrieved persons with the present political order, to raise awareness about the ills, about the shortcomings of our electoral process and system. And having created the so-called, such could be achieved through protest. Such could be achieved through protests, through seminars, through symposia, through whatever means, haven't created the so-called awareness, then the so-called civil society organizations and stakeholders could come up with a private citizen bill and approach the National Assembly for such reform, approach the National Assembly to pass such bill into law. We could kickstart the reform process by presenting a private bill to the National Assembly and lobby the National Assembly to pass such into law and for onward transmission to the President for his assent. But unfortunately, we have a National Assembly that has told the whole world, that the leadership has told the whole world that they will do whatever bill the President brings before them, or whatever policy directive or whatever policy disposition the President have, is what they will readily consent to. And let's get this fact correct. In as much that as we are not trying to preempt the disposition of the present National Assembly, it is a known fact, it is at the public domain, that every person who stood in the way of the executive in the 8th Assembly has been kicked out of the National Assembly. And even the members at the present National Assembly are most often interested in preserving their seats, considering what happened to people like distinguished Senator Saraki, what just happened to Dino, and a whole lot of them who were the voices of the people in the 8th Assembly. Most of the present lawmakers are interested in preserving their own legislative seats. So we are very much, you can, from my disposition, you can see how despair I sound. We are very much
that's all the time we have to take. However, not totally everybody. The senator from Sokoto State is back to the Senate. He was one of those who rebelled against the APC in the so-called allegation. But we do thank you, Mr. Salifu Oguche Usman, for being on the show this morning.